On December 30th, 2013, a BNSF coal train was sitting in a siding at Keithville. The train consisted of 4 engines, 2 leading and 2 defueling, with BNSF Executive ST-70 Mac 9735, TFM SD-70 Mac 1623 behind, and at the rear was KCS SD-70 Ace 4153 and BNSF SD-70 Mac Executive, once again, 9679. The train was sitting at the siding with 128 coal cars in between the 4 engines, and they were sitting there because of another train, a CSX manifest. They had the switch aligned for the main line, just like so. So they would avoid a collision happening until they were cleared to get out of the siding, realign the switch for them to get out of there. The CSX manifest had 3 engines, with ES44DC 5348, CSX AC44 CW72, and CEFX AC4400 CW 1026. Behind were a long set of mixed freight cars. Train was heading for the siding, but the switch was aligned on the main line. So everything was good for the 2 trains until the CSX train was closing in on the siding. When the BNSF coal train was listening in to the radio, they got a signal that they thought was clearance to get out of the siding or realign the switch, which was obviously not true because the other train hadn't even passed yet. But due to their error, they aligned the switch back onto the main line, back into the siding. When CSX 5348 was charging at them real fast, BNSF 9735's crew barely had time to react when they saw CSX 5348 come out of the trees. They had to flee the scene knowing that they would be involved in the wreck and probably killed if they stayed. CSX 5348 enters the siding as it slows down to 29 miles an hour, and then disaster struck. BNSF CMNR NAJ-23 is hit by MPBSR-30, causing a massive derailment. All 5 locomotives are on the ground, and the coal cars from the BNSF train CMNR NAJ-23 are strewn across the main line, closing the main line. Meanwhile, TFM 1623 is involved in there and was crushed, but thankfully was repairable, but very damaged. 1026 was also hit by the freight cars from their train, but was thankfully repaired. 9735, 5348, and 72 suffered minor damage from the collision. The crew members from both trains all survived. 2 from BNSF 9735 and 2 from CSX 5348. The cause of this crash was very clear: human negligence. The crew of the BNSF coal train was clearly at fault for misaligning the switch last second. In the end, the 5 engines involved were all returned to service. BNSF 9735 and 9679 still retain its original executive, and TFM 1623 was repaired and also retained its Gray Ghost livery. 4153 was undamaged and still has its iconic original KCS scheme. As for the CSX train, CSX 5348 and 72 retain its original YN3 paint schemes and were repaired. CEFX 1026 was severely damaged from its cab, but was thankfully repaired and got a new cab, obviously noticeable. But however, on December 30th wasn't not the day for one crash. Just merely hours later, 2 trains are intersecting each other in the town of Casselton. Those being BNSF 4934 and 6990. BNSF 6990 consists of 3 engines: 6990 leading, 6833 trailing, and 6745 rear-ending. They were carrying grain cars, and among them specifically is BNSF 486653. Meanwhile, the other train had 3 engines as well: BNSF 4934, BNSF 5958, and BNSF 6684 rear-ending. This time, this train had 2 buffer cars and crude oil .111 tank cars. BNSF 6990 had to stop because its automated braking system was turned on because one of the hoppers it was carrying had actually derailed, and thus it actually stopped. And that was soon after they crossed over a crossover, and they might have snagged a switch. However, 4934 is speeding down the other side. And soon 6990 and 4934 are closing in. However, to make things worse, 6990's derailment actually spread onto the other track, and that track was being used by BNSF 4934. An inevitable collision was going to occur. BNSF 4934 is told to watch themselves, but they are speeding down with the .111 tanks behind them. 6990 is still sitting there as they see 4934's headlights get bigger and bigger. And soon, 4934 passes 6990 and 6833. However, in mere seconds, the engineer and conductor realized they're on a collision course. However, it's too late. BNSF 4934 slams into 486653, toppled over on the other track. 4934 derails on impact. 5958 follows behind, and the tank cars start piling up behind them. They instantly go into flames, judging by this recording of 4934's crew.
Emergency! We are everywhere! G-Train, we are on fire!
Recording just shows how quickly fire erupts from the tank cars.
Which train is on fire there? Is that the 6990? 4934! 4934! We are derailed! We are all over! We gotta go! Grab your portable.
Both crew soon know that the crude oil train is up in flames. And that train that derailed was nothing but crude oil. The tank cars start piling up, and a massive ball of fire along with explosions happen. And that's what the train left behind in near the town of Casselton. Meanwhile, 6990 is still sitting there, barely knowing what's going on due to the radio, but all they can get out is a fire on a train. Explosions keep happening, and people are recording them when they happen. It's very dangerous to do that, because you don't know how big the fireballs could be. In the end, 4934 and 5958 were damaged and burned beyond repair. 4934 was turned into crisps, but somehow still held up and didn't collapse. 5958 suffered a similar fate, but with some of the paint being salvaged, being the second locomotive. Somehow. Well, why did this happen? Well, one specific hopper on BNSF 6990's train, which I mentioned earlier, was 486653. It appears normal, but it really wasn't. Microscopic cracks started forming in the axles, and over time they gradually became bigger and bigger, and it gave way through the route through Casselton. However, it didn't derail instantly, but rather when it hit a crossover. Derailed trains are not very good when it comes to switches and crossovers. A derailment can go from bad to worse with switches and crossovers. For example, a British rail train hit a car and derailed. And because of the high speed, it wasn't able to stop in time. And still went on and hit a switch, thus derailing the train. Another train came in and crashed into it. That just shows how derailments affects switches, or the effects of switches against derailments. So in conclusion, 4886653 gave way its axle and it snagged this crossover. Four 86653 was completely sheared and obliterated upon 4934 and 5958 riding over it and the tank cars exploding, burning it. Both crews survived. However, the engines and most tank cars that derailed didn't, if not all.